Okay, everyone, today we're going to be talking about personality assessment. It's chapter 3 in the textbook, and talk about the importance of measurement when it comes to studying personality. Okay. Basically, if we want to talk about personality from a scientific perspective, we have to find a way to measure it and try to measure it as accurately as we can. And there are a number of different ways in which we can try to measure personality. One way is to have people rated by other people. So in other words, if you wanted to measure someone's personality, you could measure someone's behavior. So observer ratings of an individual's behavior. So in other words, you could infer someone's personality by the behaviors they engage in. So observers can rate a person's behavior, and then we can make an assessment of the personality based on that. You could also have ratings of peers, family members, where the person would say essentially, describe aspects of this person that you know. Okay. So that's one way. Another way to measure it is through self-reports. And again, this goes back to the idea what we talked about in the last chapter about introspection. The idea that people think about who they are and what they're like. A self-report measure allows people to say or write down aspects about who they are, aspects about their own personality. So, for example, you will have personality scales which are assessing a single aspect of personality. For example, you can measure self-esteem. Self-esteem is an aspect of someone's personality. And there are measurements such as the Rosenberg self-esteem scale, which specifically measures self-esteem. It doesn't measure their depression. It doesn't measure their assertiveness. It measures their self-esteem. So it's not measuring their entire personality. It's measuring a single aspect of their personality. Then, of course, you also have inventories, which measure several distinct aspects of personality. Sometimes you're kind of getting a broader picture. Oftentimes, inventories are used for diagnosing certain kinds of disorders, for example. We'll talk about some inventories later on. Interestingly enough, self-reports are very useful at being able to access, in order to be able to get people to be able to get aspects of personality that a person can actually consciously describe. However, there is evidence that there are aspects about our personality that, simply put, we cannot describe. It's not something we can directly access. It's some parts about ourselves that we don't really know. Again, if you think about Freud, psychoanalytic theories, there's that unconscious part of our personality that we can't really consciously describe. There are other examples of now the challenge is how do you measure something that you're not consciously aware of? And one type of measurement is to use the implicit association test as a way of measuring implicit attitudes. Okay, so let's click on this link and just introduce you to this particular scale here. So we've got so basically, again, the idea is that people don't always speak their minds. People don't always know what they're thinking. But this particular type assessment examines attitudes towards different groups, and you could look at the various demonstration tests, and think about the kinds of tests you want to do. Basically, so for example, here are some of the implicit association tests to measure. So you can, for example, look at an implicit association test on race, where essentially this measurement is attempting to assess your attitudes towards black people and white people, but doing it in a way that is not asking you directly. It's intending to measure implicit attitudes, attitudes that you cannot directly explain. The argument being that you may have your own personal beliefs, conscious beliefs about race, but that there might be hidden underlying attitudes that you may have that you may not even be consciously aware of, and that this test is attempting to measure that. And actually, if you go into one of your assignments is to actually take these tests and discuss your results. So make sure you do that for this module's assignment. Let's go back to the PowerPoint here. Okay. Okay. So bottom line is the implicit measures are attempting to measure variables that you're not consciously aware of, not fully aware. And again, I want you to try to take some of those implicit association tests yourself. You can also categorize measures based on the extent to which they are objective or subjective. Okay? Objective measures of personality are measurements that are of reality, that really there's no interpretation necessary. It's not someone's personal opinion, that any two people would presumably be able to measure the same thing in the same way. For example, let's say your conceptual variable is affection. This is certainly something a psychologist would be interested in studying. How do you measure affection? Well, an objective way of measuring affection would be to count the number of times a person touches another person in an interpersonal interaction. So you have two people having talking, and you just count how many times they touch each other, and that could be your measure of affection. Is it a perfect measure of affection? No, but it is certainly objective. Because if I were to look at that interaction, and one of you were to look at that interaction, both of us should be able to come up with the same number of touches. Because again, this is objective. It just means you just observe and watch and count, and that's it. There's no gray area there where people are going to have different opinions here. So you're probably going to be pretty similar, and that would be an example of an objective measure. Now, a subjective measure would be something that involves a personal interpretation of what is going on. So, for example, if you wanted to measure hostility, and a subjective measure of hostility would be evaluating facial expressions for signs of hostility. So in other words, you look at the face, oh, that guy looks like he's angry. That guy looks like he's hostile. You're not exactly saying how he looks hostile, you're just saying he looks hostile to you. And that is subjective. Going back to the affection example here, you could look at two people having a conversation. You could say, oh, it looks like those two people love each other. So therefore, I'm going to say that they are high on the affection. And essentially, that's really a subjective point of view. That's your own personal opinion based on what you see. I might see the interaction and say, oh, they don't really love each other. They're just laughing and happy. Something like that. And this is an example where you could have some difficulties with subjective measurements of personality, because if you're trying to measure a personality characteristic and you've got 3 different people measuring it and 3 different people coming up with different measures of it, well, it's pretty confusing. You don't know who's got it right. So that is why subjective measurement is something that we should try to be avoided. Sometimes it's unavoidable. Sometimes the only way to do it, to measure something, is through subjective measurement. But try to be as objective as possible. Try to use objective measurement whenever possible.